Good morning, everyone. Y'all asleep today? First and foremost, welcome to our 8th annual LGBTQIA celebrations. Big ups to that, first of all, 8 years. My name is Doris Martinez. I am the Director of Student Diversity and Inclusion for Multicultural Affairs, and also have served as the co-chair of LGBTQIA Week, Representation Matters. And I have an amazing colleague here, and I'll have her introduce herself.
My name is Angie Hunkler, and I'm the web designer here at Highline, and I welcome everyone here.
Yes, Angie also is the co-chair of the LGBTQIA Week. This is an important week for this college. Representation matters means a lot of different things, but when we begin to reflect on the diversity, the richness of our LGBTQIA community here, not only here at the college, but globally, what does representation mean to you? And so throughout the course of the week, you're going to see various events that our incredible committee have been working on since May to bring together just of our communities, where we are, and also really celebrating the diversity, the history, the historical context and play that the LGBTQIA community has had in our society, and also really being able to look at real social justice issues that are pertaining to the community, and what we, as part of the community, as allies, can do to become social change agents within that. This week is sponsored by Multicultural Affairs and also the LGBTQIA Task Force, and so I definitely want to give thanks to those who have been really collaborative in making this week occur. Before I pass the mic, I want to give a special shout out to our LGBTQIA Week committee, Justin Dampier, Carmen Williams, Stephen Simpkins, Kevin Corrigan, Aisha Valencia, Sarah Trim, Dominique Austin, and of course, Angie Hunkler, and a special shout out to Betty Vera from Multicultural Affairs for helping us with all of the logistics, and to all our volunteers that you will be seeing throughout the week. And so thank you all so much for making this week happen. Next up, I will introduce Sarah Trim, one of our LGBTQIA Week folks that have been helping us plan as part of the planning committee, to introduce our first speaker of the week. Thank y'all so much.
Hi, everybody. Welcome again. I'm Sarah Trim. I'm an academic advisor here at Highline. We're so excited to see all of you here. I just wanted to, before I introduce our speaker, I wanted to remind everyone that today is the last day to register to vote, to update your information. So you can do that online. You can also, you can go to Building 8. TM Cell and his classes are doing a voter registration drive. So if you know somebody who needs to update their information, please refer them, remind them to do that. Now, I'm very proud to introduce our speaker. So Sonj Basha is an artist, activist, and community leader. While attending Mills College in Oakland, California, an all-women's school, Sonj advocated for an admissions policy that accepts transgender women and gender-fluid individuals. As a queer Muslim in Seattle, an anti-racist advocate and feminist writer, Sonj has led empowering workshops in various cities and contributed to groundbreaking policy work in higher education. They are also involved with NOR, which is a collective for queer and trans Muslims of Seattle. Sonj has served on the City of Seattle's Community Involvement Commission, as well as a funding panel for gender justice organizations, and has volunteered to serve LGBTQ refugees and asylum seekers. Sonj has also spoken alongside city and state officials about decolonizing violent rhetoric and bringing to the center marginalized identities. Rooted in Seattle, they work professionally in the King County courts as lead bail agent with Pacific Northwest Bail Bonding, the only agency owned and operated by people of color here in Washington. and we're so glad to have you with us today. I encourage everyone to join me in welcoming Sonj Basha.
I just got a little bit warm hearing all those great things about myself. 1 second. How's everybody doing? Sweet. So I tend to work as a facilitator. I'm not going to do the awkward thing where I'm going to ask everyone who's like spread out to sit together, but I do want to say that if you are sitting alone, to maybe just acknowledge who's around you, because we are going to do just a couple moments of partner share. So just kind of know where you're sitting and see if there's anyone around you. First and foremost, I always want to acknowledge that we are currently standing on the unceded indigenous lands of the Duwamish people on the Salish Sea, on property that was built by enslaved African peoples from the Black diaspora and continues to be upheld by unseen immigrant labor. I'm so grateful to be here at Highline Community College. This is my first time here, and I'm already having a great time connecting with some really, really amazing people. So I want to preface with a question. And the question is, what does it mean to be alive today? What does it mean to be living in the margins during a time where violence is pervasive and our own justice system actually justifies and rectifies its perpetrators? If you have seen the news this week, you may have an inkling of what I may be implying. Another question to think about for the next 45 minutes or so is, how can the LGBTQIA2 community become stronger by bringing parts of itself closer together? So some of us, when we think about oppression and we think about discrimination and we think about how power structures are upheld, it's actually by disseminating the communities that it stands above. So separating ourselves from each other. So how can we actually come closer together? So again, my name is Sonj Basha. I'm queer, obviously. I'm Muslim. I'm Sikh. I'm bleeding, I'm a survivor, and I'm a thriver. I'll also add that I'm a sometimes not so friendly, exhausted, outspoken, and radically honest queer Muslim neighbor. I'm a gay as fuck immigrant. I'm a sexy, differently abled, brown, they, them. And despite our administration's attempt at literally disposing of, deporting, and systematically killing my communities, I'm still here. You're still here. So today is intended to actually be sort of a kickoff, a little bit of a building block for what it sounds like is going to be an entire week full of amazing speakers, presenters, and activities that you all are going to have the opportunity to attend. So with that, I would just like to build a morning of inspiration more than anything else. So an inspiration for bringing change makers together. And whether or not you identify as a social justice advocate or a leader in your community, I strongly believe that every single person has the opportunity to identify as a change maker. So together, today, we're going to explore the power of a couple of things that I really love, which are intimacy, authenticity, and building community. So I'm thinking about how we can actually cultivate the tools to move forward and fight justice in our everyday lives, outside of just this week, outside of just a Pride Month, outside of just a chapter of your life, but really how can we show up and fight for justice every single day, just by being who we are. So I'm not necessarily here to give a typical speech. I've done keynotes, I've sat on panels, I've done the thing where there's this like linear structure of like I must know more and I must be more educated than other people in the room, but that's actually not what I want to do today. But rather I just want to share some of my story. I think that it's really important when we understand what it means to be a catalyst for change, that we understand that both our individual and our collective liberation are deeply embedded and intertwined with actually just the stories of who we are. And like, not the stories of how I got here or what's on my resume, but rather like who I am for real. And I'm curious about who else is out here. So I'll actually just start off here.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول.
I also like to feel really uncomfortable sometimes. I think living on my edge is where most of my growth happens, which means I really like to make other people uncomfortable sometimes, because I like other people to have to live on their edge and find moments where they can grow sometimes as well. So you just saw a picture of me naked on a prayer rug with the sound of the female azan. I remember the first time that I ever heard the female voice actually singing the call to prayer, which is something that I'm used to hearing as a child 5 times a day. And it wasn't until I was in my early 20s that for the very first time I heard the song being sung by a female voice. And I lost my shit completely. Like, internally dismantled every moment that got me to where I was. Every idea that I had about myself, my culture, my community, what it meant to be alive, and compartmentalizing myself as, at the time, a queer Muslim woman. The first time I heard it, I was actually at a show, a performance artist project called Coming Out Muslim by a couple of friends of mine, which, as you can imagine, was incredibly radical at the time. It was around 2012. And that really was the beginning of my journey of decompartmentalizing the parts of myself. At the time, I was still an activist, I was an educator, but I got to step outside and be queer on the street, and then I got to step inside my home life, and I got to be like Muslim. But I never actually understood how to reconcile the two. So actually, like, what was my activism if I wasn't advocating for justice from a holistic perspective? So I had a major reality check. and have since then done my best to bring my fullest self and the wholeness of my identity into every single space, with the idea or the hope that maybe even by just knowing that I exist, it could inspire someone else to step out of their comfort zone and be their fullest self as well. Another thing I want to acknowledge is that some of the content that I may be presenting or talking about may be incredibly thought-provoking, maybe a little bit emotionally or psychologically triggering, and we do have a few people that have volunteered to hold some space if that's something that you need. Maybe at this moment, if some of those folks can raise their hands. And maybe just one person right now. So if you do feel like you need something, you can just stand up, you can raise your hand, you can walk out, and maybe we'll provide some space for you, as a heads up. I remember the first time I actually played a photo of that specifically was actually during a performance arts project of my own here in Seattle, at Seattle University. It was in a show called Yoni Baat that I was part of, which translates to talking about the vagina, and it's a queer and we did the first actually queer and trans South Asian rendition of the vagina monologues, written and directed by ourselves. And someone, an auntie, and I performed this in front of like my own community for the first time, and when I say my own community, I mean like aunties and uncles. And if you know anything about this South Asian community, like auntie and uncle kind of implies like a lot of judgment. And so I actually had an auntie come up to me afterwards, give me a lot of support, a lot of encouragement, like let me know that she was in solidarity with me, and also let me know that she overheard a death threat that was directed at me during when I was playing that photo. So, you know, and I performed the next night, and I performed the next night, and I'm still here, and I'm still showing my photo, and I'm not going anywhere. So again, like, being our truest selves is deeply uncomfortable and so, so, so radically important. So what I can also say is that another part of the decompartmentalizing of myself when it came to my queer identity specifically was understanding that there are actually other parts of myself that are exactly the same. And when I say exactly the same, I mean socially marginalized, misrepresented, and subjected to violence, both within the personal and the societal spheres. So yeah, while there may be a lot of differences that are on the surface, there are actually like some core fundamental things about lots of different parts of myself that are actually the same. So I'm just here today to ask you to do a couple of things, but the first thing I'm just gonna ask you to do is really just see me. And just like allow me to talk about who I am and really just be seen. So if you are in agreement with that, then in this moment, I would consider you to be my ally. If you're willing to be my ally, and you're able to, I'm just gonna ask you to affirm me before I continue. I'm feeling pretty vulnerable, I've already opened up this far, I'm still uncomfortable, but I would really just at this point love some affirmation. I think the way that we affirm each other is so important. So if you're down to affirm me, I'm gonna ask you to just give me a super excited maybe like awkward, heck yes. I'm gonna ask you to do it 7 more times, okay? So we'll practice one more time. So I'm gonna say an affirmation about myself, and you're gonna give me a? All right, so today I affirm that I'm committed to deconstructing the power and oppression. Today I affirm that I acknowledge that who I am and my experiences are what lead to my own idea of what justice is. Today, I affirm that everything is interconnected. Today, I affirm that I can live at the intersections of who I am without fracturing the movement and selecting struggles. Today, I affirm that I show up as my whole self in order to be seen and validated. Today, I affirm that I show up as my whole self in order to work together with you to build solidarity to fight for justice. That one was not as great. I'm going to say that one again. Maybe I worded it funny. Let me try again. Today, I show up as my full self in order to work with you to build solidarity to show up for justice. I feel better already. Thank you. So I just feel really, really lit up by thinking about what it means to deconstruct dominant narratives, if you can't tell. One of the things that really it makes me feel powerful is thinking about how to not assimilate to mainstream ideas. So, and when I say mainstream ideas, I mean mainstream ideas of queerness. I mean deconstructing mainstream ideas of feminism. I mean deconstructing mainstream ideas of even what it means to be radical. So to me, being radical means understanding and grasping at the roots. It was actually Angela Davis that was quoted to say that radical simply means grasping at the roots. So to me, I really understand what being radical is by understanding systems of globalization. Being radical means knowing that every space that I'm in is an opportunity to show up for more justice. And being radical to me means that every person that I have an opportunity to stand up in front of and be vulnerable enough to be myself is a moment and a movement just a little bit closer towards my own and therefore collective liberation. So if you're down, stick around, because now I'm going to ask you to do a couple of things. How many of you have seen the cultural iceberg? It's probably pretty familiar, especially if you've been around campus. So I'm just going to remind those folks who haven't seen it or come across it or been familiar with it or didn't raise your hand, that this is kind of, we're just going to work for a few minutes to get a little bit below the surface with each other. So essentially the cultural iceberg in a nutshell is that as we're walking around campus or we're walking around our daily lives or we're having our regular day-to-day conversations, we tend to actually know or be able to only see what's on the surface of someone. Right? So what we see about someone, what we assume about someone based off of our brief conversations tend to be our body language, our gestures, our dress, our tone, what type of language that we use, maybe our cadence. And then with that, there are some other cultural signifiers. Maybe you make certain assumptions about my ethnicity or my race or my culture or my gender or my sexuality. But really, that's it. How much more can you really tell about me if I just walked by you? At least how much more can you really know? So what we're going to do, actually, for the next 25 or 30 minutes, is try to actually understand what's underneath for me, and also how we can, as individuals within our society, work towards actually showing up below the surface in every single conversation that we have. So when we think about those, then we start to think about what deep culture is, and belief systems, values, prejudices, experiences, fears, relationships, passions, just really, really what is at the core of who we are and how we show up into the world. Because what we also do as we walk around and see each other on the surface is we walk into spaces, or we are navigating certain environments. And it is my truth that most every single environment that I walk into in the Western world, and especially in Seattle, are containers that include cultural appropriation, slut-shaming, fat-shaming, cisgendered supremacy or heterosexism or heteronormativity, bi-erasure or monosexism, ableism, misogyny, trans misogyny, racism. And I'm not just throwing these out there as like key words or concepts. Like these are environments that I'm entering into, consciously and subconsciously. And if you'll just bear with me and be at my ground level, even if these aren't necessarily things that you feel on your day-to-day. So what I'm gonna ask of us today is to actually create a different kind of container here in Building 7. A hot word in the queer community is safe space. I try not to use that very much because I don't really think that very many spaces are actually safe. I think that's gonna take a lot more work than the last 15 or 20 minutes that I've been talking. So instead of creating a safe space, I advocate for creating a brave space. So when I think about what a brave space is, I think about, at the very minimum, the type of space where we can be courageous enough to speak what's on our minds and what's on our hearts. At the very minimum. And maybe that doesn't necessarily mean that we're safe, but we can be brave. Everybody with me? Heck yeah. So I would like to create, this is from Advocates for Youth directly, but it's something that really resonates with me when I think about what a brave space is. It's a place where anyone can relax. Just think about that for a second. Where anyone can just relax. How radical is that? Be fully expressed, fully self-expressed, without the fear of being made uncomfortable, unwelcome, unsafe on account of your sex, your race, ethnicity, your sexual orientation, your gender identity or expression, your cultural background, age, physical or mental ability. And it's really just a place where the rules guard each person's self-respect and dignity, and strongly encourage everyone to respect each other. Strongly encourage everyone to respect each other. With me so far? Yes. Thank you. So I'll leave this up here. So I understand that every room I enter is a lifetime of my entire story, and that I don't always have time to tell it. But oftentimes, the things that I don't talk about are the things that I'm tired of talking about. But we have to build resilience in order to move towards justice. So in order to find that resilience, we have to actually have enough energy to at least bring our fullest selves. Maybe that means that we don't have to show up in certain ways, but we can at least bring it. So I'd like to take just a minute, maybe two, to introduce yourself to the person sitting next to you. But wait for me, because this is how we're gonna do it to be super clear, is I'm going to ask you to share something about yourself. You're gonna have about 45 seconds to share it, which is not a lot, and then you're gonna hear my voice on the microphone again. I'll ask you to quiet down, and then we'll switch to the next person. So this may seem like a silly question, but actually I don't get asked it often, and I really like when I do. And I get asked a lot like, oh, what do you do? Or, oh, where do you live? Or, oh, what are you studying? But I rarely get asked just like off the bat, like what I feel really passionate about. So I'll start off by answering in 45 seconds to give an example. So in this moment, in September after a long summer, what I feel really passionate about and something I've been working on is actually creating safe spaces for people of color at music festivals. That's something I feel really passionate about that I spent a lot of time doing this summer. So I feel really passionate about creating safer spaces for people of color at music festivals. So if you found a person next to you, just one, acknowledge who that person is. And the person with shorter hair is gonna go second. So the person with longer hair, just share for 45 seconds what you're passionate about. Got about 10 more seconds. And in any way that feels comfortable for you, thank your partner for sharing. And we'll move to the second person, where you can just share what you're passionate about. Got about 10 more seconds. And in whatever way feels comfortable to you, thank your partner for sharing. And as soon as you're ready, I'll take all of your attention again. Just silently, how was it? Thumbs up. Maybe that was in your comfort zone. Maybe that was in a little bit of your stretch zone. Hopefully it wasn't in the panic zone. So sometimes when I get asked that question, I do feel a little bit of, not panic, but like pressure, because I feel so passionately about so many different things that, like, how do I share in 45 seconds what has led me to be passionate for 31 years? And then I just like blurt something out that then I later overthink and what I could have said and what I couldn't have said. So whatever you shared and whatever you heard was perfect and exactly what it was meant to be, just so you know. So the reason why I like to just ask people to share what they're passionate about is, as we kick off an entire week, we get to actually think about what it means to walk around this campus and to enter into every classroom and to enter into every conversation, knowing that every person has a passion that's below the surface of what we might actually think. And when we really start to see each other in that way, we start to treat each other differently, I think. And we start to understand that once we start to treat each other differently, that those are actually microcosms of what it means to be social justice change makers. Now that may be a little bit of a stretch, but I'll tell you why. What I think of when I think of a change maker is anyone that likes to do what I do, which is just like think about things more. And that's a radical thing to do. And we're on a college campus, so our job is to just think about things a little bit more. So when I think about what does it mean, again, coming full circle, so I'm queer and I'm Muslim. How did that happen? How's that even possible? But then I start to think about actually what both of those things mean within the context of our culture today is that they're both deviant. They're actually both in defiance of what Western cultures consider to be mainstream. So anything that strays from white male supremacist notions of anti-blackness, capitalism, globalization, the war on Islam, heteronormativity, anything that strays is considered to be deviant. And so actually, anything that shares a similarity can coexist at the same time. So actually, the fact that I'm Muslim can coexist with the fact that I'm queer, and in fact, in a lot of ways, they complement each other. And in a lot of ways, they make it so that when I see the news, or when I look at media, or when I have conversations, I'm looking at it through an entirely different lens, where I actually have to build the resilience to continue to show up. So I've talked a little bit about like, hey, yeah, so, I heard this song, and then all of a sudden, I was so excited to be myself all the time. And the reality is that my journey has not been easy. It's been really hard. It's been a struggle. It's been full of a lot of mental health problems. It's been full of a lot of community harm. And I'm constantly having to build my own resilience and find it in different ways. So some of the ways that when I see the news and I immediately have to reach into my pocket and find the little nuggets of resilience that I can are by just acknowledging the reality. So I started off by talking about some hard stuff, and then I got excited and talked about passion, and then I like to talk about some hard stuff again, right? And that's kind of how I build resilience, is it's all about the balance. So some of the hard stuff that I find it necessary to talk about is what we see in the news. So I like to think about the intersections of my identity similar to the intersections that Bell Hooks talks about a lot, which is race, class, and gender. And when I start to think about race, class, and gender, I start to see the news differently. So when I start to see young Muslim people being killed, I can't just think about that as Islamophobic, because a lot of the young Muslim people that are being killed in the United States are also black. So I have to really start to understand how I think about the fight for justice as not just the fight towards dismantling Islamophobia, but it's also dismantling anti-blackness, right? So that's one example. So Nabra Hassanin, does anyone remember when she got killed in Virginia a couple of years ago, and it was deemed not a hate crime? A young black hijabi girl in Virginia. I also grew up in Virginia, so I know that it can be a really shitty place to be. Sheila Abdus Salam. I don't know if any of you heard the news on her, but she was the first black Muslim judge in the nation in New York City, and her body was found floating in the Hudson River. And before they even decided that they were going to investigate, they deemed it a suicide. I get to read the news, and I remember the morning I woke up to the Pulse nightclub shooting. Every time September 11th rolls around, I get to turn on the news and not only see the violent rhetoric that is pitted against my Muslim community, but I also get to see the news about the backlash of that violent rhetoric that terrorizes the Sikh communities all over the United States. All of the survivors that had to watch the appointment of our latest Supreme Court nominee on the news all week long, shout out to your resilience. I also, this week, send a massive prayer to Haiti, who just experienced another earthquake, and which I truly believe is a result of not only our crying climate, but is also a reminder of one of the most resilient people in the world, in Haiti. So what does it mean to be living queer and LGBTQ week? I'm queer and. So I'm not just having conversations about liberating myself and my gender and my sexuality. I'm having conversations about what it means to be queer and. Queer and. Queer and. Flint, Michigan still doesn't have access to clean water. That's a queer issue. The coral reefs are dying at a faster rate than can be calculated because of the rise of the oceanic temperatures. That's a queer issue. But we're still here. We're still super queer. And we're still fighting for justice, considering all of these things. I still get the privilege of coming up here and talking to you for 45 minutes about who I am. What a privilege. And even just that, I just feel gives me all of the nuggets of resilience that I need to look at the news and to see the next story and to read the next headline and know that we're still here. So we're coming down to just our last few minutes, and I'm going to ask you all to do one more thing for me. And it doesn't actually include you to share anything, so nobody panic quite yet. But I am going to ask you to do two things, and I'm going to let you know what they are ahead of time so that you can make your own choices to take care of yourself. The first thing I'm going to ask you to do is just turn back to that same partner. You don't have to do it right now. And you're not actually going to share anything, but I'm just going to ask you all to make a little bit of eye contact while I share something. If that feels too edgy for you, you should do it. And then the second thing I'm going to ask you to do after that is just, if you feel comfortable, is close or lower your eyes while I say something else. So I'm just giving you a heads up. Remember how awkward it was when you saw a naked photo of me and heard a female azan? We're going to kind of enter into that awkward, uncomfortable zone again. Can I get a heck yes? So if you'll do me the favor of looking at the person next to you, whoever was your partner. And for a moment, so this is going to be a silent activity. I know you like each other so much already, but this is going to be in silence. Just look at that person and remember what they were passionate about. Take a moment and remember what you were passionate about. Look at that person and know that this is someone that is alive on planet Earth at the same moment as you, born into the same period of crisis, yet you're looking into the face of someone who's got a really good clue of what's actually going on. And that there's not a day that this person wakes up without being aware of what's happening today. Without being aware of the rampant changes in environment, social injustices, disconnection amongst young people, yet this person is still here today. And they haven't turned away. Or if they have turned away, they haven't gotten up and walked away. Here is someone who is unafraid to love the gift of being alive on this planet today. And in any way that feels good to you, just share a moment of gratitude with them. And now for the second part. Now that you've thanked your partner for living on the edge, just take a moment to yourself. And if it feels right to you to take that moment to yourself in your chair and close your eyes, you can close your eyes. Or if it means lowering your eyes or just finding a neutral gaze. I would like you for a moment to just tap in to the very real possibility that you will play a role in the healing of our world. That you are in the right place, at the right time, at just the right moment, with just the right gifts and just enough motivation to carry the possibility of a better world with you through the rest of your day, through the rest of your week, and through the rest of your lifetime. That you are in the right place at the right time with the right gifts. And in whatever way feels right for you, just like thank yourself for showing up. And thank you for having me.